Good morning, guys. I'm Mr. Simelane from Ulen Academy Education. So today I'll be teaching you about grade 12 climatology. So this is geography grade 12. If you are studying with geography just now, then I've got you, and everything we're going to do here is really going to help you going forward. So today the only thing that we'll be looking at will just be focusing on summary or introduction of what exactly is needed for you to know in grade 12 climatology. And then moving forward, we'll be dealing with all the chapters stepwise. But for now, let's just focus on climatology. So the first thing that you're supposed to know is this, which is called the global air circulation. And you did this in grade 11. So this is just a consolidation. We talk about all these things. You know this diagram, I believe it's registered in your mind. So every time you look at this diagram or the global air circulation, it can also be called a tricellular circulation. So there are three things that you're supposed to know because most of grade 12 climatology is just based on this global air circulation. So if you do not know anything about this global air circulation, you must struggle, especially when you are dealing with mid-latitude cyclone and a tropical cyclone. So looking at this global air circulation, the first thing that you need to know are the pressure belts. So there are 4 pressure belts that are found ranging from the equatorial low pressure, the subtropical high pressure cell, the polar low pressure, the subpolar low pressure, and the polar high. So these are your 4 pressure belts which you're supposed to know. And then we also have what we call the winds. So we also have 3 types of wind when looking at this global air circulation. So just doing a minor recap, looking between 30 degrees and 0 degrees, which means between the subtropical high pressure and an equatorial low pressure. There are winds which are called the tropical easterlies. And then between 30 and 60 we have the westerlies, and then between 60 and 90 we have the polar easterlies. So all of these things we did them in grade 11. And then the last one we have the type of cells. So the type of cell we've been given on this diagram, which just shows you that between 30 and 0 degrees we have what we call a healthy cell circulation. And then secondly, between 30 degrees and 60 degrees we have something called a viral cell. And then lastly, between 60 degrees and 90 degrees we have what we call a polar cell. So all these 3 things, they are so important for you to know, because we'll also be touching on these pressure belts, we'll touch on these winds, and most importantly, we'll also be touching on this cell as we move with tropical cyclone and a mid-latitude cyclone. So now, let's go to introduction. What exactly are you supposed to know in climatology grade 12? So there are 4 topics that we're going to deal with. Once you know this topic, we can just call them the subtopic of climatology, which means when you're studying, you need to know what is expected of you for each of these topics. So firstly, we are going to deal with what we call the low pressure systems. Moving away from the low pressure systems, we have secondly what we call the high pressure system. I hope you can see it's the opposite of the low pressure. So the firstly is the low pressure system. Secondly, we have our high pressure systems. And then moving from that, we have valley climates, and then the last one, it is your urban climates. So you just need to know them in this order, as we'll be dealing with them in this order on this video. So today it will only just be about an introduction, and then on my second video, we're just going to focus on the low pressure system. So now let's see, what are the low pressure systems that we have in climatology grade 12? So firstly, we have what we call a mid-latitude cyclone, and then secondly we have what we call a tropical cyclone. I hope now we can see that we are being introduced into a new term which is called a cyclone. What exactly is a cyclone? When we talk about a cyclone, it's just the low pressure systems, which means here we can say the low pressure systems, or we can say the 2 cyclones that we have and that we'll be dealing with in grade 12 climatology is the mid-latitude cyclone, and then secondly it's our tropical cyclone. As most of you know, that in grade 12 we are focusing mostly on the South African weather, which means now when we look on the mid-latitude cyclone, the tropical cyclone, we also need to link this back on how do they affect South Africa during winter, especially the Mid-Latitude cyclone, and then tropical cyclone. We'll also be looking at on which season do they mostly affect South Africa. So now, as we move with this cyclone, you need to know in your mind that how do they affect South Africa and when do they affect South Africa. So we only have these two under the low pressure system, which is your mid-latitude cyclone together with the tropical cyclone. Now, moving forward to the anticyclone or the high pressure systems, there are three of them. Now, you remember I said if you do not want to say the low pressure system, the term that you can use is a cyclone, because low pressure just stands for a cyclone. Now, moving to the high pressure systems. So now, if you do not want to say high pressure system, you use this term called anticyclone. So anticyclone and high pressure is just the same thing. So now, there are three high pressure systems that will focus on them. So first thing, with the South Atlantic anticyclone, with the Kalahari anticyclone, with the South Indian anticyclone. So now, just like on the low pressure system or the cyclone, you also need to know that how do these influence the weather in South Africa, especially the Kalahari anticyclone, because this will introduce to us on two seasons, which is summer and winter. So we'll be looking on how does the Kalahari anticyclone influence the weather patterns over South Africa in these two seasons. So now, what we'll be looking at under anticyclone. So first, you need to know the position or the location of these three anticyclones, and then secondly, you need to know on how do they influence the weather in South Africa during winter. And during winter, we have a weather phenomenon which is called the backwinds. Moving to summer, we have a different weather pattern now. You no longer have the backwinds. So now what you have during summer, there's something called a line thunderstorm and a moisture front. So there are exam questions where they mostly like to ask you, maybe they'll just give you an image or they give you a diagram, just anything. And then maybe they show you backwinds. Then they will ask you, in which season maybe do backwinds occur? Then already you know it's during winter. Or maybe the question may be like, which season is depicted on the above diagram? So now, how do you know? You just look at which weather phenomenon is occurring. For example, if a weather phenomenon that is occurring, it's the line thunderstorm and moisture front, then you already know that it is summer. But if the weather phenomenon is backwards, then you also know that it's winter. And all of this is determined by your anticyclone. So we'll reach on that. We're going to do all of this in detail. We'll do the backwinds, we'll do the light thunderstorm, and the moisture front. And then lastly, what we have was something called a coastal low pressure. So coastal low pressure can be found in both seasons, but it is of utmost importance when we come to winter season. And we'll see why it is like that. Now, moving to the next topic, which is topic number 3, which are valley climates. Valley climates will just introduce us into two types of winds, which is the anabatic winds and the katabatic winds. Now, when we talk about the anabatic winds, it's the winds that occurs during the day in a valley. And then when we talk about the katabatic winds, are winds that occurs at night. And these winds are associated with something called a thermal belt. So we'll also be looking at this term, that what exactly is the thermal belts, anabatic and katabatic. So do not worry about that. And then lastly, we'll just look at the urban climate. Then urban climate is divided into two, which is the urban heat island, and then we also have something called a pollution dome. So all these topic, guys, you must know them, because you never know what the examiner might ask you during your final examination or during any test that you might write. But what you know, you must be able to differentiate between all these topics, and also you must be able to know how and when do they affect South Africa. So that's all for today, guys. We'll meet again in our next video. Thank you.